The helicopter's rotors cut through the Afghan dawn like a whispered prayer, but inside the cabin the silence was deafening. Lieutenant Commander Valentina Ghost Reyes sat motionless in her flight suit, staring at coordinates that made no sense. The mission briefing had been standard: extract a compromised asset from Taliban territory. Simple, routine. Except the GPS coordinates led to a valley that wasn't supposed to exist on any map, and the asset's call sign was one she'd heard in her nightmares for 7 years. Phoenix 7, this is Overwatch. You are cleared for approach to LZ Phantom. Weather is clear, wind from the northwest at 15 knots. The voice crackled through her headset, but Ghost's hands remained frozen on the collective. Behind her, SEAL Team Bravo shifted restlessly in their seats. She could feel their eyes burning holes through the back of her helmet. "Ma'am," Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice carrying that particular edge that SEALs reserved for pilots they didn't trust. "We're burning daylight." Ghost's throat felt like sandpaper. The coordinates weren't just familiar. They were identical to the ones from Operation Blackwater, the classified mission that had turned her from the Navy's Golden Girl into a ghost story whispered in ready rooms. The mission that had killed 12 good men and left her with a distinguished flying cross she'd never wanted, and a medical file so redacted it looked like a crossword puzzle. "Copy, Overwatch." Her voice came out steady, professional, years of training kicking in despite the tremor in her hands. "Phoenix 7 beginning descent to LZ Phantom." The Black Hawk dropped through the morning thermals, and Ghost felt the familiar weight of the aircraft responding to her touch. Below them, the Hindu Kush mountains stretched endlessly, their peaks crowned with snow that would never melt. Beautiful and deadly, like everything else in this god-forsaken country. "Jesus, Ghost," whispered her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jake Wizard Park, through the intercom. "Your heart rate just spiked to 140. You seeing something I'm not?" She wasn't seeing something. She was remembering something. The last time she'd flown these coordinates, she'd been 26 years old with enough confidence to move mountains. Now, at 33, she knew mountains moved back. Tank's voice cut through her memories again. "Time to target." 15 minutes, Ghost replied, banking the helicopter toward a valley that held more secrets than the Pentagon's basement. What she didn't tell them was that, according to every satellite image she'd studied, that valley should have been empty. What she couldn't tell them was that her orders came from someone who'd been dead for 7 years. The Black Hawk descended into history, carrying 8 men who thought they knew their pilot's story. They were about to discover they'd been wrong about everything. The first sign of trouble came as a whisper through the radio static. Ghost caught it before anyone else, a frequency that hadn't been used since Blackwater, transmitting a code that made her blood turn to ice water. She adjusted her headset with trembling fingers, isolating the signal. "Phantom Base, this is Lazarus. Package is secure. Repeat, package is secure." Lazarus. The call sign belonged to Major Daniel Cross, her former squadron leader and the man whose body she'd watched burn in a Taliban ambush 7 years ago. Ghost's vision tunneled, the cockpit instruments blurring as memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. "Ghost, you copy." Wizard's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Your hands are shaking." Behind them, Tank was studying his tactical display with growing concern. "Ma'am, I'm showing multiple heat signatures in the valley, way more than one asset." Ghost forced herself to focus, muscle memory taking over as she adjusted their approach vector. The Black Hawk responded smoothly, but inside her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Through the chin bubble, she could see the valley opening up below them, a natural amphitheater carved from stone and shadow. "Overwatch, Phoenix 7. We have eyes on LZ Phantom, requesting updated intel on ground assets." Static filled her headset for nearly 30 seconds before the response came. "Phoenix 7, maintain current heading. Intel stands as briefed." But the intel was wrong. Ghost could see it now. The valley wasn't empty. Scattered across the rocky floor were the skeletal remains of aircraft, their metal bones bleached white by 7 years of mountain weather. She recognized the twisted wreckage of an Apache helicopter, its rotor mast snapped like a broken neck. Beyond it, the burned-out hull of a Chinook transport, and further still, pieces of aircraft she couldn't identify. "Ma'am," Tank's voice had lost its earlier edge, replaced by something approaching concern. "You seeing this graveyard down there?" Ghost keyed her radio with steady hands. "Phantom Base, this is Phoenix 7. I have visual on multiple crashed aircraft in the LZ, requesting immediate clarification of mission parameters." The response came not from Phantom Base, but from that impossible frequency. "Phoenix 7, this is Lazarus. Welcome back to the neighborhood, Ghost. We need to talk." Wizard spun in his seat, eyes wide behind his helmet visor. "That's not possible. The brief said Lazarus was KIA in 2014, Ghost finished quietly. "Operation Blackwater." She pushed the collective forward, beginning their descent into a valley where dead men sent radio messages and crashed helicopters became monuments to classified failures. Tank unbuckled his harness and moved forward between the pilot's seats. "Ma'am, with respect, I think we need to abort this mission." Ghost's laugh came out bitter and sharp. "Chief, I've been trying to abort this mission for 7 years." The Black Hawk settled into its approach, rotors beating a funeral rhythm against the mountain walls. Below them, the aircraft graveyard waited in patient silence. As they descended, Ghost caught sight of movement among the wreckage. A figure emerged from behind the burned Chinook, tall and lean, wearing desert camouflage that belonged to another war. Even from 300 feet up, she recognized the way he moved, the casual confidence that had once made her believe in happy endings. "Impossible," she whispered. But Tank was already raising his rifle, his voice cutting through the intercom like a blade. "Ghost, that man down there. He's been dead for 7 years, but he's walking around like he owns the place." Ghost's hands found the controls without conscious thought, years of training overriding the chaos in her mind. "Wizard, start recording everything. Whatever's happening here, someone's going to want answers." The Black Hawk touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, the skids settling onto rocky ground stained with old blood and older secrets. Through the windscreen, Ghost watched Daniel Cross walk toward them with the measured pace of a man who had all the time in the world. Behind her, she could hear Tank coordinating with his team, weapons being checked and safeties disengaged. Professional warriors preparing for the impossible. But Ghost knew that bullets couldn't kill what was already dead, and some secrets were buried so deep that even graves couldn't hold them. The rotors spun down to idle, and in the sudden quiet, she could hear her own heartbeat echoing off the canyon walls. Tank was the first one out, his boots hitting the ground with the solid thump of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. His team followed in textbook formation, weapons ready but not quite raised, professionals responding to a situation that defied their training. "Sir, identify yourself," Tank called out, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. Daniel Cross, or the thing that wore his face, smiled the same crooked smile that had once made Ghost believe in forever. "Easy, Chief. We're all friends here." His voice carried the same Louisiana drawl, the same easy confidence that had gotten him through flight school and into her bed and eventually into a classified grave. Ghost killed the engines and climbed down from the cockpit, her legs unsteady on the rocky ground. Up close, Daniel looked exactly as she remembered, weathered face, gray eyes that missed nothing, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a bar fight in Pensacola. The only difference was the hole in his flight suit, directly over his heart, surrounded by burned fabric and what looked suspiciously like 7-year-old blood. "Hello, Val," he said quietly. "You look good, flying suits you." "You're dead," the words came out flat, matter of fact. "I watched you die." "Yeah, well," Daniel shrugged, glancing around at the aircraft graveyard. Death's more flexible than the Navy makes it out to be. Wizard emerged from the helicopter, camera in hand, documenting everything with the methodical precision of someone who knew this would all end up in front of a congressional committee. Tank's team had spread out in a defensive perimeter, but their weapons remained lowered. Even hardened SEALs could recognize when they were operating outside the normal rules of engagement. "Ma'am," Tank's voice was carefully neutral. "Orders." Ghost looked around the valley, taking in the scattered wreckage, the impossible man standing before her, the absolute silence that pressed against her eardrums like deep water. "What happened here, Daniel?" "Same thing that's been happening for 7 years," he replied. "We keep fighting the same war over and over until we get it right." Behind him, other figures began emerging from the wreckage. Ghost recognized them all, pilots and crew chiefs and door gunners, all wearing the same burned flight suits, all carrying the same bullet holes and blast fragments that had killed them in another valley, in another life. "This is impossible," Wizard breathed, his camera forgotten in his hands. Ghost checked her sidearm, more from habit than any real hope that bullets would help. "Chief, I think we need to expand our definition of possible." Tank moved closer to Ghost, his voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry beyond her ears. "Ma'am, your file, the redacted sections. This is what they were hiding, isn't it?" Ghost nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Operation Blackwater wasn't just a rescue mission that went wrong. It was something else entirely. "What kind of something else?" Before Ghost could answer, Daniel spoke again. "The kind that doesn't stay dead when it's supposed to." He gestured to the assembled crew of impossible men. "Welcome to the afterlife, Phoenix 7. Population, classified." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of cordite and old blood across the valley floor. In the distance, Ghost could hear the faint sound of rotor blades, growing steadily louder. "Incoming," Tank reported, raising his rifle. "Multiple aircraft heading this way fast." Ghost looked up at the rim of the valley where the sound was coming from. Whatever was approaching, it wasn't friendly. She could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 2 deployments and 100 missions that officially never happened. "Daniel," she called out, "what's coming?" His smile faded, replaced by the hard expression she remembered from combat briefings. "The same thing that's been coming for 7 years. The reason we can't stay dead." He gestured toward the wreckage around them. "Every crew that's ever flown these coordinates, every pilot who's ever tried to complete this mission, they all end up here eventually." The sound of rotors grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like approaching thunder. Tank's team tightened their formation, weapons trained on the sky. "Ma'am," Wizard's voice was tight with controlled fear, "we need to go now." But Ghost was already moving toward the Black Hawk, her mind racing through calculations and possibilities. Whatever was coming, running wasn't an option. Not anymore. She'd been running from Blackwater for 7 years, and it had finally caught up with her. The first Apache crested the valley rim like a predatory bird, its nose cannon already tracking toward their position. Ghost recognized the aircraft immediately, tail number 84569, the same helicopter that had exploded in her gunner's hands during Blackwater. Behind it came 2 more Apache, followed by a Chinook transport that she remembered crashing into the mountainside in a ball of fire. "Holy shit," Tank breathed. "Those are our birds, the ones that went down in Blackwater." Ghost was already climbing back into the Black Hawk's cockpit, her hands moving with the automatic precision of someone who'd flown in combat zones for over a decade. "Wizard, get us spun up. Now." "Ma'am, where exactly are we going to go? In case you haven't noticed, we're in a box canyon with hostile aircraft overhead." But Ghost wasn't listening. She was remembering something Daniel had said years ago, during a mission brief that officially never happened. Something about temporal anomalies and classified research, and the reason why some valleys didn't appear on maps. The Black Hawk's engines whined to life as she brought the rotors up to speed. Around them, Tank's team was loading back into the cabin with the controlled urgency of professionals who knew when it was time to leave. Phoenix 7, this is Overwatch, the radio crackled. We show multiple unidentified aircraft in your vicinity. Respond immediately. Ghost keyed her radio, her eyes fixed on the approaching formation. Overwatch, Phoenix 7. We have contact with hostile forces, requesting immediate close air support. Negative, Phoenix 7. No air assets are available for your grid square. Because officially, they weren't supposed to be here. Ghost pulled pitch, lifting the Black Hawk off the valley floor as the first Apache opened fire. The cannon rounds sparked off the rocks where they'd been standing seconds before. "Ma'am," Tank's voice was steady despite the circumstances. "That Apache, it's flying without a crew." Ghost risked a glance at the lead aircraft as they climbed. Tank was right. The cockpit was empty, the aircraft flying itself with the same automated precision of a military drone. "Wizard, are you getting this?" "Every impossible second of it." The Black Hawk climbed hard, trading altitude for distance from the hostile formation. But the valley walls were too steep, the enemy aircraft too fast. Ghost could feel the familiar weight of tactical calculation, the same mental process that had kept her alive through countless missions. Except this time, the math didn't work. "Contact left," Tank called out. "Apache moving to intercept." Ghost banked hard right, using the Black Hawk's superior maneuverability to avoid the Apache's cannon fire. The canyon walls flashed past her windscreen in a blur of stone and shadow. Below them, Daniel and his impossible crew stood watching from the aircraft graveyard, their faces turned skyward like they were watching a movie they'd seen before. "Wizard, how long until we reach the valley mouth?" 2 minutes at current airspeed, assuming we don't get shot down first." Ghost pushed the Black Hawk harder, the engine screaming in protest as she demanded every ounce of performance from the aircraft. Behind them, the Apache formation was closing fast, their cannon rounds stitching lines of destruction across the canyon walls. "Phoenix 7, this is Lazarus." Daniel's voice crackled through the radio, impossibly clear despite the interference. "You can't outrun them, Val. They're part of the loop." "What loop?" Ghost demanded, jinxing left to avoid another burst of cannon fire. "The same mission, over and over, until someone finally completes it." The valley mouth was visible ahead, a narrow gap between towering peaks that led back to the real world. Ghost could see it clearly, close enough to taste freedom. Then the Chinook transport dropped out of the sky directly in front of them, blocking their escape route like a massive steel door. "We're trapped," Wizard said quietly. Ghost looked at her instruments, calculating fuel, ammunition, and time. The math was brutal and unforgiving. But she'd been in impossible situations before. "Tank, how much C4 are you carrying?" The SEAL's laugh came through the intercom like a death rattle, enough to make this interesting. Ghost smiled grimly, her hand steady on the controls as she turned the Black Hawk back toward the valley floor. Sometimes the only way out was through. And sometimes, through men accepting that some missions never really end. The Black Hawk descended toward the aircraft graveyard with the controlled precision of a surgical strike. Ghost had made her choice. If they were trapped in this valley with Daniel's impossible crew and their automated aircraft, then she was going to find out why. "What's the plan, ma'am?" Tank asked, his voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone who'd followed orders into hell before. "We land, we talk to Daniel, and we figure out what really happened during Blackwater." Ghost's voice was steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Because whatever this is, it's been waiting 7 years for us to come back." The hostile aircraft maintained their positions around the valley rim, weapons trained on the Black Hawk but not firing. It was almost like they were being herded rather than hunted. "Phantom Base, this is Phoenix 7." Ghost called into the radio. "We are returning to LZ Phantom to investigate multiple anomalies. Request immediate backup and medical support." Static filled her headset for long seconds before a different voice responded. Not the calm professionalism of their original controller, but something older, more tired. "Phoenix 7, this is Phantom Base Actual. Be advised no backup is available. You are on your own." Wizard looked at her with wide eyes. "Ma'am, that wasn't the same controller we've been talking to." Ghost nodded grimly. "I know, everything about this mission has been compromised from the beginning." The Black Hawk touched down again in the same spot, rotors spinning down as the engines cycled to idle. Daniel was waiting for them, his impossible crew arranged behind him like an honor guard of the dead. Tank was first out again, but this time his weapon remained slung across his chest. Whatever was happening here, bullets weren't the answer. "Daniel," Ghost called out as she approached, "I need answers, real ones this time." He gestured toward the wreckage around them. "You're looking at the answers, Val. Every crew that's ever tried to complete this mission ends up here, including us." "What mission?" The brief said asset extraction, nothing more. Daniel's laugh was bitter. The brief lied. It's been lying for 7 years. He pointed toward a section of the valley wall that looked different from the rest, smoother, almost artificial. "That's not a rock formation. It's a bunker, built by people who were experimenting with things that should have stayed in science fiction novels." Ghost followed his gaze, her pilot's eye picking out details that didn't belong in natural stone. Hidden vents, concealed antennas, the subtle geometric patterns that spoke of human construction. "What kind of experiments?" "The kind that punch holes in time and space. The kind that create loops where cause and effect get tangled up like Christmas lights." Daniel's voice carried 7 years of exhaustion. "We were supposed to extract a scientist who'd gone missing. Dr. Sarah Chen, theoretical physicist specializing in temporal mechanics." "Chen," Wizard breathed. "That name was in the briefing files, but it was redacted." Ghost felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. She wasn't missing. She was trapped here. "Bingo!" Daniel gestured toward the bunker. "Chen and her team were working on something called Project Ouroboros, theoretical time manipulation for tactical advantage. They created a temporal anomaly that turned this valley into a closed loop." Tank had been listening in silence, but now he spoke up. "A loop that traps anyone who tries to complete the mission." "Until someone figures out how to break it," Daniel confirmed. "That's why they keep sending crews. Why your file is so heavily redacted, Val. Because officially this mission has been completed successfully dozens of times. Unofficially, every crew that comes here joins our little gathering." Ghost looked around at the assembled dead men, all wearing the same expression of weary resignation. "How long have you been here?" "Time's flexible in the loop. Could be 7 years, could be 7 minutes, could be forever." Daniel's smile was sad and tired. "The question is, are you going to be the crew that finally breaks us out?" The wind picked up again, carrying sounds that didn't belong, radio chatter from missions that had ended years ago, the distant thunder of artillery that had fallen silent before any of them were born. The valley itself seemed to be breathing, inhaling the past and exhaling futures that would never come. Ghost checked her watch, but the hands weren't moving. Time had stopped, or maybe it had never started in the first place. "What do we need to do?" she asked. Daniel pointed toward the hidden bunker. "We need to go inside and shut down Project Ouroboros, permanently." Tank hefted his rifle, chambering around with the solid metallic click of someone preparing for war. "How heavily defended is that bunker?" "That's the beauty of it," Daniel replied. "It's not defended at all, because according to the loop we never make it that far." Ghost looked at her crew, Wizard with his camera, Tank with his weapons, the SEAL team with their unshakable professionalism. Good people who deserved better than being trapped in someone else's temporal experiment. Then I guess it's time to change the ending. The bunker entrance was exactly where Daniel had indicated, hidden behind what appeared to be a natural rock fall, but was actually a sophisticated camouflage system. Tank's team approached it with the methodical precision of professionals who'd breached countless hostile positions. Motion sensors, reported Staff Sergeant Lisa Saber Kim, the team's demolitions expert. But they're not active. Whatever's inside, it's not expecting visitors. Ghost studied the entrance through her binoculars. The technology looked advanced but old, like it had been cutting edge sometime in the early 2000s but had been forgotten by progress. Wizard, are you still recording? Everything, though I'm not sure anyone's going to believe this footage. Daniel and his crew had followed them to the bunker entrance, moving with the eerie silence of men who no longer needed to worry about noise discipline. The control room is 3 levels down, he said, past the laboratories where Chen's team did their initial experiments. What happened to Chen and her team? Ghost asked. Same thing that happened to us. The loop consumed them. They're still down there, still working on the same equations, still trying to solve a problem that creates itself. Tank signaled his team into entry formation. Ma'am, orders. Ghost checked her sidearm and adjusted her helmet-mounted light. We go in, we find Chen, we shut down this experiment and we go home. And if it's not that simple? She thought about the 7 years she'd spent running from Blackwater, the nightmares that woke her up in cold sweats, the way her file had been redacted until it looked like abstract art. Then we improvise. The bunker entrance yielded to Tank's lockpicking skills with surprising ease. The heavy steel door swung open on silent hinges, revealing a corridor that stretched into darkness like the throat of some massive beast. Power's still on, Saber reported, studying her tablet. But the energy readings are off the charts. Whatever they were working on down there, it's still running. Ghost took point, her weapon ready but not raised. Behind her, Tank's team moved with the fluid coordination of professionals who'd worked together through countless missions. The corridor was clean and sterile, like a hospital that had never seen patients. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly green glow, and the air hummed with the barely audible sound of massive machinery. On the walls, safety posters from another era warned about radiation exposure and temporal displacement procedures. This is like walking through a tomb, Wizard whispered, his camera capturing everything. In a way it is, Daniel's voice came from behind them. This is where physics went to die. They reached the first level quickly, a series of laboratories filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Massive computers lined the walls, their screens displaying equations that seemed to shift and change when nobody was looking directly at them. Ma'am, Tank called out from across the lab, you need to see this. Ghost approached the workstation where Tank was standing. The computer screen showed a schematic of the valley, but it was overlaid with what looked like mathematical notations and temporal coordinates. It's a map of the loop, she realized. Look at the timestamp. Tank pointed to the corner of the screen. The timestamp read, Operation Blackwater, Mission Day +1. But that was impossible. Operation Blackwater had been completed 7 years ago. The loop resets the timeline, Daniel explained. Every crew that comes here, every attempt to complete the mission, it all gets folded back into the same 24 hours. Ghost studied the schematic, her mind racing through implications. So officially, Blackwater is still ongoing. Has been for 7 years. Will be forever unless we shut this down. Saber called out from another workstation. Ma'am, I'm reading massive energy buildup from the lower levels. Whatever's down there, it's getting ready to do something big. Ghost checked her watch again. Still frozen at the same time they'd entered the valley, but she could feel something building, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. How much further to the control room? 2 more levels, Daniel replied, but they get stranger the deeper we go. Ghost signaled for the team to move out. Behind them, the laboratory equipment hummed and clicked with artificial life, solving problems that created new problems, building a trap that fed on its own existence. The second level was worse. The elevator descended through what felt like miles of rock and steel, finally opening onto a corridor that defied every law of physics Ghost had ever learned. The hallway stretched away from them in both directions, but somehow managed to curve back on itself like an optical illusion made real. "Stay close," Tank ordered his team. "Don't trust what you're seeing." Along the walls, windows looked out onto impossible vistas, valleys that contained other valleys, skis that held multiple suns, landscapes that folded in on themselves like origami made from reality. "Temporal viewing ports," Daniel explained, his voice carrying the weary patience of someone who'd explained this before. Chen's team used them to observe other timelines, other possible outcomes. Ghost approached one of the windows, peering through the thick glass at a landscape that looked almost familiar. In the distance, she could see a helicopter landing in a valley filled with aircraft wreckage. As she watched, tiny figures emerged from the helicopter, herself, Tank, Wizard, and the SEAL team. "That's us," she whispered, "but we're already here." "Multiple iterations of the same mission," Daniel confirmed. "The loop creates infinite copies, all playing out simultaneously." Wizard was filming another window, his face pale behind his camera. "Ma'am, this one shows the valley from before the loop. No wreckage, no bodies, just an empty research facility." Ghost looked through that window and saw the truth of what this place had been. A small research station nestled in a mountain valley, populated by scientists who thought they were changing the world for the better. "How many people died when the loop started?" she asked quietly. "Just the research team initially, but every crew that's come here since." Daniel gestured around them. "We're all part of it now." Saber had found a stairwell leading down to the third level. "Energy readings are spiking again. Whatever's down there, it's responding to our presence." Ghost took a deep breath, tasting recycled air and old fears. "Then let's go finish this." The third level was where reality finally gave up pretending to make sense. The stairwell opened onto a vast circular chamber carved from living rock, its walls covered with displays showing every possible variation of their mission. Thousands of screens, each one displaying a slightly different version of the same events. Ghost and her crew landing in the valley, confronting Daniel, approaching the bunker. In the center of the chamber, a massive device hummed with barely contained energy. It looked like someone had tried to build a particle accelerator inside a cathedral, all sweeping curves and impossible geometries. And standing before the device, still working at a control console, was Dr. Sarah Chen. She looked exactly as she had in her personnel file, late 30s, serious expression, the kind of focused intensity that came from dedicating your life to unlocking the universe's secrets. Except her skin had a translucent quality, and her movements carried the mechanical precision of someone who'd been repeating the same actions for 7 years. "Dr. Chen," Ghost called out. Chen looked up from her console, her eyes focusing on Ghost with effort. "You're new, different from the others. We're here to shut down Project Ouroboros." Chen's laugh was hollow. "You can't shut it down. It's self-sustaining now. Every iteration of the loop provides more energy, more data, more possibilities to explore." Tank approached the device, his tactical eye examining its construction. "Ma'am, this thing is the size of a building. How do we destroy something like this?" "You don't destroy it," Chen replied. "You change the initial parameters. You alter the moment when the loop began." Ghost studied the screens around them, watching countless versions of herself make the same discoveries, have the same conversations. "How?" Chen gestured to a smaller console near the main device. "The temporal anchor point. It's set to the moment I activated the device. If you can reset it to before activation, the loop collapses. What happens to everyone trapped in the loop? They return to their proper timeline. The dead stay dead, the living return to life. Chen's expression softened. It's what I've been trying to do for 7 years. Daniel stepped forward. Then why haven't you? Because I'm part of the loop. I can't change the parameters that created me. Chen looked at Ghost with something approaching hope. But you can. You're from outside the temporal bubble. Your actions can cascade backward through the timeline. Ghost approached the temporal console, studying the controls. They were surprisingly simple, a series of dials and switches that looked like they belonged on a 1970s radio. "What's the catch?" she asked. "The loop fights back. It will try to prevent you from completing the reset. The closer you get to success, the more reality will try to stop you." As if summoned by her words, alarms began blaring throughout the chamber. The screens around them flickered and went dark, then displayed the same message over and over. Temporal breach DETCTD. Initiating defensive PROTOCOLS. "Ma'am," Saber called out, "we've got company topside." Through the chamber's viewing ports, Ghost could see into the valley above. More helicopters were landing, dozens of them, all identical to her own Black Hawk. From each one emerged perfect copies of her crew, all moving with the same determined purpose. "The loop is creating reinforcements," Daniel explained. "Infinite iterations of the same mission, all designed to stop you from succeeding." Ghost's hands hovered over the temporal controls. 7 years of running from Blackwater, 7 years of nightmares and redacted files and questions that couldn't be answered. "How long do I have?" Chen checked her instruments. Maybe 10 minutes before the defensive protocols overwhelmed the chamber. Tank moved his team into defensive positions around the console. "Ma'am, we'll hold them off as long as we can." Ghost began adjusting the temporal parameters, working backward through the timeline toward the moment when Chen had first activated the device. With each adjustment, the chamber shook more violently, reality itself protesting the changes. On the screens, she could see the other iterations of her crew fighting their way through the bunker, all racing toward the same goal. Some were ahead of her, some behind, all part of the same desperate attempt to break free from a prison made of time itself. "Almost there," Chen called out. "Just a few more adjustments." But the chamber was filling with smoke now, and the sound of weapons fire echoed from the levels above. The loop was throwing everything it had at them, determined to preserve itself. Ghost made the final adjustment, her finger hovering over the activation switch. "Do it," Daniel said quietly. "End this." She pressed the switch, and the universe held its breath. The temporal anchor released with a sound like reality tearing in half. Every screen in the chamber went white, then black, then began displaying new images. The valley as it had been before the loop, empty and peaceful under an Afghan sky. Chen's translucent form began to solidify as the timeline corrected itself. Around them, the impossible architecture of the bunker started to shift and change, reverting to the simple research facility it had originally been. "It's working," Chen breathed. "The loop is collapsing." But something was wrong. Ghost could feel it in her bones, the same instinct that had kept her alive through countless combat missions. The temporal energy wasn't dissipating, it was concentrating, building towards something. "Chen, what happens to the energy when the loop collapses?" The scientist's face went pale. I didn't account for that. 7 years of stored temporal energy, all being released at once." On the screens, Ghost could see the valley above them. The aircraft graveyard was dissolving, the impossible helicopters fading like morning mist. Daniel and his crew were becoming translucent, preparing to return to their proper deaths. But the energy release was creating something new, a massive temporal explosion that would tear a hole in spacetime itself. "How do we contain it?" Tank demanded. Chen was working frantically at her console. We need a focal point, something to channel the energy safely into the time stream. Ghost understood immediately. A pilot, someone to fly it out of here. The energy levels would be fatal. Whoever does it won't survive. Ghost looked around the chamber at her crew, Tank with his unwavering loyalty, Wizard with his quiet competence, Saber and the SEALs who'd followed her into hell without question. Good people who deserved to go home to their families. She thought about 7 years of running from Blackwater, 7 years of nightmares and survivors' guilt and questions that kept her awake at night. Chen, can you configure the energy release to follow a specific flight path? Yes, but... Do it. Program it to follow a route out of the valley and into the upper atmosphere, somewhere.